Welcome to History, Mystery, and the Unexplained, the show where we explore everything from true crime to cryptids, the paranormal, and beyond. Today, we will continue to look at the places that time forgot. If you missed part one, feel free to go back and give it a listen. Otherwise, before we begin, please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever on the platform of your choice. Also, be sure to leave us a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Perhaps one of the most famous of all ghost towns is Centralia, Pennsylvania. This is thanks in part to the video game and movie series that inspired Silent Hill. No, you will not find bubble-headed nurses or giant executioner-style pyramid-headed monsters. Although if you spend enough time in the city center huffing the carbon monoxide that bellows up from the endless fire burning under the earth, you might start to be plagued by nightmare creatures of your own subconscious. White ownership of this area that is today known as Centralia dates back to 1793. That being said, nothing was done with the land for over 40 years. In 1841, Jonathan Faust built the Bull's Head Tavern. It's interesting to note that Faust did not own the land on which this tavern and hotel was built. And by many accounts, he didn't even own the lumber in which he used to build it. No one really seemed to care about the fact, and the town of Bull's Head was born. Oh, the days when you could just piss on a plot of land and say, that's mine now. The next evolution of the town and the first name change came with Alexander Ray. Ray was a civil and mining engineer for the Locust Mountain Coal and Iron Company. By 1854, the Mine Run Railroad was complete, mining began, the town was platted, and roads were built. Ray renamed the town Centerville, believing it would become the center of anthracite coal mining. With the construction of a post office in 1865, the town got its second name change. The state already had a Centerville. To avoid confusion, it needed to change its name to Centralia. Although I keep calling it a town, it got its final status the following year when it was incorporated as a borough. For those that aren't familiar with this term, a borough is a self-governing municipal entity in places like Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Jersey, and more. AKA what the rest of the world calls a town. Moving on. It is of strange note to history that Alexander Ray was murdered on his way home to Centralia one morning by members of the Molly Maguires. They came across Ray's carriage and assumed he would be carrying the week's earnings. He was not. That being said, the men didn't want to be caught. They murdered Ray on the spot and took what little he had. Almost immediately following the murder, 4 men were arrested. Thomas Donahue, John Duffy, Michael Pryor, and Patrick Hester. 3 of the 4 went to trial and were found innocent. All were set free. Years later, however, guilt got the best of one of the men involved, and Daniel Kelly confessed. But Kelly was not going down alone. He pointed the finger at Peter McHugh, Patrick Tully, and once again, Patrick Hester. The 3 men were hanged for their crimes on March 25th, 1878. That being said, many of the Irish-American activists that made up the Molly Maguires were hung for various crimes around this time. The validity of these crimes is still a matter of debate to historians. But this is a story for another day. As interesting as these tales are, they have little importance to why Centralia is today a ghost town. At the town's peak in the 1890s, it was home to 2 theaters, 5 hotels, 7 churches, 27 bars, a bank, a post office, 14 general stores, and 2,800 people. That's a ratio of 103 people per saloon. If it wasn't for a Memorial Day preparations in 1962, this would probably be the end of the story. Centralia would be just another coal mining town forgotten to history. Everything changed for Centralia, however, on May 27th, 1962. Firefighters were burning debris at the local landfill. Every time they put the fire out, it would get reignited. This is when it was discovered that the landfill was sitting on an old strip mine and that the burning ignited the coal beneath the earth. There were many attempts to stop the burning early on, but as the fire spread, containment became more and more expensive. The fire spread faster than bureaucracy. By 1984, carbon monoxide was leaking into the homes, infrastructure was crumbling, and it was becoming unsafe to live in the community. Most citizens accepted buyout options from the government and left their homes behind. But others fought to stay in their homes. But in 1992, Pennsylvania claimed the land by eminent domain, but after many more legal battles, finally decided in 2015 to allow the remaining citizens to live out the remainder of their lives in the borough. The fire burns to this day and is expected to burn for at least another 200 years. Surprisingly, the borough of Centralia is not the only endlessly burning place on Earth. The Dargaza gas crater in Turkmenistan is often referred to as the door to hell. Darvaza is an extremely remote location in the Karakum Desert. It is so remote, in fact, that most people who visit stay in Ashgabat, 167 miles or 270 kilometers away. It takes at least 3 hours to get there. Nonetheless, reviews say that this picturesque location is worth the list. Since this location's origins date back to the USSR and its secrecy, exactly how the crater was formed and how the fire began is lost in time. It's generally believed, however, that the Soviets were mining natural gas when the earth crumbled beneath them. Flammable, poisonous gas was pouring into the air, and it's suggested in 1971, miners lit the blaze to protect the area. They believed that stray gas would quickly burn off and mining could resume. Now, over 50 years later, the fire continues with no stop in sight. Speaking of Ashgabat, this is the home to a luxury utopia that never was. The Guinness Book of World Records notes Ashgabat as having the most white marble-clad buildings in the world, 543 of them to be exact, or 4.5 million square meters of marble. Many of these buildings constructed in 1991 have never been occupied. In fact, the town is a town of many records. Largest enclosed Ferris wheel, largest flagstaff, largest fountain, largest mural of a star, and more. It is also known as the City of the Dead because few people live there today. Few can afford to live there. Turkmenistan is one of the least visited countries in the world. In 1948, while still under Soviet rule, an earthquake destroyed the city, killing 2/3 of the population. In 1991, after gaining independence, the city rebuilt, and they rebuilt like no town ever. It is all white marble and gold, and this is the most expensive place to live in the world. Although you may not have heard of the once thriving city of Pripyat, you've certainly heard of the disaster that sealed its fate. Pripyat was once home to almost 50,000 residents, many of whom worked at the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Now, exactly what happened on the evening of April 26th, 1986 has been thoroughly documented in numerous documentaries, television shows, podcasts, and more. As such, I'm not going to do that here. What I will say is that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the worst nuclear disaster the world has seen to date, was the result of poor communication, insufficient planning, and a series of truly unfortunate events. At 1 a.m. on April 25th, a safety test began that would seal the fate of the area for centuries to come. The idea was to see if, in the event of a power failure, the reactors could continue generating electricity until the backup generators powered on. As part of this test, the emergency cooling system in the reactor 4 was shut down so it wouldn't interfere with the results. Power demand in the area remained too high for the test to proceed, and it was put off until 11 p.m. This meant that the night crew, who hadn't been properly briefed or trained as to how to perform the duties of the test, would be the ones starting it. Just before 12:30 a.m. on the 26th, power in the reactor plummeted, and in an effort to regain power, several control rods were removed. Within a half hour, power stabilized, and the supervisors gave the green light to proceed. Within 20 minutes, however, the power spiked, and one of the operators hit the emergency shutdown. This should have caused the control rods to drop back into the core, but due to malfunctions, it resulted in a massive explosion. The 1,000-ton roof on the reactor 4 exploded in a fireball and it shot into the sky. Still, it would take more than 36 hours before the citizens in the surrounding area would be evacuated. More than 350,000 people were relocated from Chernobyl, Pripyat, and about 100 smaller residential areas. They were told to pack only enough for 3 or 4 days, as it was believed that things would quickly be contained and life would return to normal. Life would never return to normal. It resulted in a truly surreal landscape, a town frozen in time. If you've ever played Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, you may have seen some of the iconic images of the city, the famous Ferris wheel, the swimming pool. And sadly, it was a Ferris wheel that never had a chance to be used. The amusement park that was scheduled to be open 5 days later had the tragedy not happened. Today, much like North Brother Island, nature is reclaiming the land. A forest has sprung up, and round the crumbling buildings, wolf, lynx, moose, and other wildlife have moved in. And despite the radiation, the animals are thriving. Among the animals are also many wild dogs. When the city was evacuated, people left their animals behind, and after decades of breeding, they have created a beautiful, unique breed of its own. It may come as a surprise, but this was an area that could be visited at least until recently. Day passes could be obtained from the government, and numerous companies offered tours. There are hotspots in the area that are dangerous, but the radiation level in the tour area is in the range of 15 to a few hundred microrangens. Lethal doses are in the 3 to 500 range. At the time of this recording, this is a country under attack. Early in the war, tanks tore through the contaminated zone, kicking up radioactive material. This caused huge spikes in the radiation levels in the area. The future of this historic location and the country where it lives is very much in question. When you say boomtown, you most likely conjure up images of westward expansion in the United States and the gold rush of the 1800s. Most likely, what you do not think of is German occupied Southwest Africa. In the early 1900s, as the legend goes, on April 14th, 1908, Zacharias Lawala was sweeping sand off the railroad tracks when he uncovered a diamond. His supervisor, August Staunch, recognized what it was immediately and left the railroad and got his prospector's license. Diamonds were everywhere, on the beaches washed ashore from the Atlantic Ocean, and just under the sand. Prospectors poured into present-day Nambia, and the town of Kolmanskop was born. This desert town had a bowling alley, a hospital with the first x-ray machine in the area, a ballroom, theaters, and so much more. Quickly, the town became a Sperrgebiet, a forbidden zone so mining could be controlled. And don't worry, Germany gladly put all the displaced natives in the area to work in the mines, like good colonizers should do. During World War II, diamond prices plummeted, and around this time, the mines were running dry. So, just a short distance to the south, more diamonds were found. By 1950, the town was empty and the prospectors moved elsewhere. Today, the buildings are slowly disappearing beneath the dunes of the Nambian desert. Windstorms have filled the homes with sand and tore away the roofs. A guardhouse separates the town from the rest of the world. For a small fee of around $200 Nambian, about $15 US, you can wander the ruins on your own. Henry Ford was the Elon Musk of his day. One part genius, one part highly problematic public figure. Yes, Ford paid his workers more than his competitors. Yes, Ford revolutionized the auto industry and the factory work in general with the assembly line. And yes, Ford even provided his workers with health care and pensions, something few employers did at the time. This all said, Henry Ford was an outspoken anti Semite, a hater of labor unions, and a general narcissist. The last trait of his is a big part of why Fordlandia failed to ever live up to its intended purpose. Ford wanted his own source of rubber to manufacture tires for his cars. To achieve this goal, he acquired 2.5 million acres of Amazonian rainforest along the Tapajós River in Brazil. In 1928, land began to be cleared to construct buildings, and the problems were almost immediate. Hundreds died just clearing the jungle alone. Scorpions, ants, snakes, and wasps would bite and sting, and workers slashed away with their machetes. Once the buildings were finished, the problems didn't end. No one ever thought to consult a botanist or talk to the locals about what it took to grow rubber trees. Similar plantations successfully produced rubber, but these were in Asia. Another Henry Wickman, smuggled rubber seeds out of Brazil in 1876. A story for another day. The importance of this is that the climate of Asia and the climate of Brazil are very different. Yes, this is where rubber trees' natural habitat is, but that also means this is where the tree's natural predators exist. When you plant trees side by side, orchard style, disease can spread very quickly from tree to tree, which it did. In addition, when you clear cut the land, well, it's not called the rainforest for nothing. It rains a lot. And that rain, without a dense canopy of trees to deflect or soak in the moisture, the soil simply erodes the earth, washing away vital nutrients. When it's not raining, the sun beats down on the land below. Again, a canopy of trees helps protect the plants closer to the ground. With clear-cut plantation-style growing, the trees feel the full wrath of the sun. What I'm trying to say here is that the trees just didn't grow in a way that was fruitful. If only that was the full extent of the problems. Henry Ford had many beliefs, and he felt everyone should live by them. He strongly enforced a standard 8-hour workday. In Brazil, workers liked to work a few hours in the morning when the sun was low on the horizon, take a break in the afternoon, and then resume work in the evening. To him, what worked in American Midwest should work everywhere. In fact, Fordlandia looked like a Midwestern suburb transposed into the jungle. Ford was also a vegetarian and a firm believer in American prohibition. Even though liquor was legal in Brazil, it was not allowed in Fordlandia. Employees would sneak away in the night to the Island of Innocence with its numerous bars and brothels for entertainment. Although there is some note of hamburger being served at Fordlandia cafeterias, most of the meals consisted of oats, rice, and canned fruits. Even with hamburgers, this was not native Brazilian diet. This was a Midwestern American diet. It didn't really agree with the stomachs of many other workers. The food actually resulted in riots in the town, and at one point, workers grabbed their machetes, cut power and telegraph lines, and chased the managers and the cooks into the jungle. Today, 2,000 people still live in Fordlandia. One father proudly talks about how his daughter is 4th generation Fordlandian. So in this regard, it's not 100% abandoned, but Ford's vision is a thing of the past. In the end, Fordlandia cost $20 million and 3,500 lives. The final stop on our tour of towns that time forgot is Kadykchan, Russia. Kadykchan is a remote former mining town along the Kalama Highway. a highway that is also known as the Road of Bones. This stretch of road spans 1,260 miles or 2,030 kilometers through some of the coldest inhabited places on Earth. It was built by Gulag prisoners during the Stalinist era of the former Soviet Union. It is widely believed that prisoners who died during the construction were simply paved over. These were harsh, brutal working conditions, and the death toll was high. This was also permafrost. Digging extra holes for bodies would have been difficult and time consuming. During the 20 years of construction from 1932 to 1953, hundreds of thousands lost their lives, their bones contributing to the road's nickname. Likewise, Gulag prisoners were used to build the buildings that made up Kadykchan. Once the buildings were finished, they were put to work in the mines. Surprisingly, even after the closure of the gulags, workers stayed on. In fact, Kadykchan saw its boom in the 70s and 80s with a population of over 10,000 people. By 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and one of the town's two mines starting to run dry, workers started moving out. Then in 1996, there was a methane explosion in one of the other mines. Only 6 lost their lives in the explosion, but it meant death to the town. What remains today is a quiet Siberian town with 2 crumbling schools, a house of culture, an old cinema, mostly in ruins, a sports center, a statue of Vladimir Lenin, and several residential apartment buildings. There is also abandoned cars, a playground, a city administration building. What you will not find is any people in residence. Like so many of the other places we looked at, this is a city frozen in time. Of course, there's no shortage of places in the world touched by man that, for one reason or another, have been left to return to the earth, like a symbol of a post-apocalyptic world. There are so many, in fact, that someone could probably dedicate an entire show just to this topic alone. And perhaps one day we will explore some more here. But for now, I'm Christopher Damien. This is History, Mystery, and the Unexplained. And thank you for listening.